Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Randi Deckard, who is the SVP of Client Engagement at BESLER. She is also the co-chair of the DFW chapter for Pavilion and does some side hustling advisement work as well. Randi, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited, especially to dig into some of your early career stuff. But before we even do that, I want to start with like 10, 15-year-old Randi and kind of understand what were you thinking about from a career perspective. No one really seems to have a plan to get into sales and sales leadership. So what was 10 or 15-year-old Randi thinking about?
So I was a farm girl, and literally, my nickname was Ram Poop because I hauled shit, cow shit. Okay. I knew that my education was the ticket out. So you're right. I was not thinking about sales. I was really good at math and sciences. So actually, my first year of uni, Canada, that's why I say uni, not college, was engineering.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, I sales was not in the cards for me at all.
And so you presumably you weren't interested in keeping the farm life up. You were looking for a ticket out.
Yeah, 100% a ticket out. Like literally, I used to haul cow manure 7 a.m. like every day of the week. And then I also had to do neighbor stuff. So, like I said, I wanted to get out of the poop business.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I imagine that when we talk about your sales leadership skills here later on, maybe certain reps complaining about certain things, you could tell them that story and remind them of what
Yeah.
hard work is. Um, but I read that you have assisted in 100 autopsies, and that is also a deviation from a path to sales leader. So can you take me through that early part of your journey? So you're at uni
Sure.
studying engineering, and you somehow are these cow autopsies, or is this the same time, or is
No,
this
no.
just
So, I did my first year of engineering, and while I excelled in the sciences, I really wanted to do something different, and so my counselor recommended clinical lab research. So I have an advanced research degree, and as part of that, you get exposed to pathology, and so my first job out of university, I moonlighted in the morgue, and so I had 100 autopsies under my belt. Thought
wow?
I wanted to be a forensic pathologist, and my medical examiner, pathologist mentor was like, "What are you doing, Randi?" He goes, "You do not belong with dead people. You have so much personality. Have you considered the commercial side of healthcare?" And that was the first time I'm like, what do you mean? Because I literally had not even considered it. And there ended up being a startup that was selling to pathologists. And I was like, okay, I know pathologists. So I'm just going to talk to them. My revenue goal for the year was $1 million. I sold five, and they're like, well, if you can do that, can you teach a team to do that? And that's really how I ended up launching into the commercial side of healthcare, is because I sold to someone, i.e. the pathologist, and I knew that ICP cold. And since then, I've transitioned into tech, and so I'm like either CFO, CEO, CTO, CIO. Just depends on the organization, how they're structured. Don't use my clinical background at all, except for the training aspect. And what I mean by that is,
Hmm.
the documentarian portion, processes, experimenting in go to market. We experiment all the time, right? But I always call it like failing forward and looking at the data and being able to, pull the right lever in an experiment. But in go to market, it's like, what one thing are you going to change? Everyone's so used to talking about like marketing A, B, but we do the same thing in sales. Like, what are we going to change? How are we going to, improve? All of those things, like, are things that I did as part of my process as a clinical scientist. I just didn't realize how they could apply to go to market and sales. That's kind of my superpower, is having that discipline training, and
Hmm.
transferring that into go to market and sales and the revenue growth engine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So your goal in that initial sales role was 1 million. You
Yeah.
did 5.
Yeah.
How were you able to do that? Was there a moment in that journey where it clicked, or was it right away? You're like, oh, I'm good at
No,
this,
it
or
was
was it?
not right away. I mean, honestly, when I said yes, like I had no idea how I was going to do this million. But I knew that I knew that I know how to talk to pathologists. I also knew pathologists just from my network. And so I would say like the first few conversations were not like stellar Randy conversations. Because I literally, had no sales background
Hmm.
whatsoever. But actually think that was in my favor because I treated it like a conversation. And I came from that place of curiosity, even though I knew, still didn't assume. Within the first 3 months, I saw patterns and where I got traction and, things that I could do to scale quickly was I just started asking for referrals, up front. Hey,
Hmm.
you found this valuable. Who else would you refer to me? And here, let me make it easy for you. Here are 3 other pathologists in surrounding hospitals that I would love to talk to. Who do you know? And then I also realized that at the time there was a significant gap. This is like a few years ago, so there wasn't like webinars and stuff like that very prevalent. So I would have thought leadership lunches or dinners, and so I would do road shows and gather customers and non-customers, bring them together. And of course, we would do what I call a lunch and learn, and we would go over cases. And as a result of that, they're like, well, how do I get this level of service? Right. And it's like, oh, you got to talk to Randy. She can give you boutique service with no impact to what you're doing.
Hmm.
And that's literally how I did it. And I would be with a pathologist and I would drop names. Yeah, I'm working with so and so, and we just had a really interesting case. Oh, really? Yeah. And I built some really great relationships where I'm like, here, I'll call them right now. We can talk about this case right now. And that's
Hmm.
literally how I did it. And the funny thing is, today or this year, one of our best things that we did was thought leadership dinners. So not with pathologists, but with CFOs. So I laugh. I've kind of come full circle with using thought leadership as a way to grow business.
That makes a lot of sense. And so you have kind of a knack for it, obviously, in your first year of being successful. And you mentioned the next thing to do is to have a team do it,
Yeah.
to scale yourself that way. What surprised you most about coming into leadership?
So I had a couple advantages that I have to give some context to the audience. Number one, the first half of my career, while I was moonlighting doing autopsies, when I was doing clinical research, I was already in leadership positions. So I had as many as 100 reports at one time,
Oh wow.
um, in on the clinical side. So I want to caveat that. But what helped me is the fact that I was a process and documentarian. And what I mean by that is when I brought people on, I had this is how I did it. So I had guardrails. And then, I encourage, because I'm not a micromanager, encourage saying, these are the guardrails, but I want you to use your personality, whatever tactics you have, and we're going to keep iterating. But by having something up front and not having to recreate that, I could replicate. And I also knew what I was looking for from a success factor job description of who I would go out and hire to do this. And surprise, I didn't go out and hire everyone who knew healthcare or knew pathologists. To me, there were things that those are certain things I could teach them. It was certain skill sets, and the first thing was really being able to be conversational and be curious and
Hmm.
really be solution centric with the pathologist, and because relationships and trust are so important.
Is that more different or more the same than the job description and the skills that you would look for when you were hiring on the clinical research arc of your career? Were you fundamentally like looking for similar traits, or do you think that someone who's in sales is
No,
different?
so like the clinical research, there was definitely more like skill and degree,
Okay.
portion of it, like as part of that, as part of the hiring process. Because in order to do that job, you had to, be credentialed. Like no one on this call is going to care, but I have like lots of initials, and I'm ASCP board certified. Like no one in go-to-market cares about that, right? But when you're doing that clinical work, that was important. And one of the things, I have found some of my best hires from non-traditional. I think it's because I came into sales non-traditional that I think my eyes are wide open. I don't necessarily need to hire someone exactly like me to be successful. It's the transferable skills that are more important. I can teach people healthcare. I can teach people how to talk to, whether it's a CFO, pathologist. I can teach that. Yes, having certain clinical knowledge was helpful earlier on in my career, but that's not what's helpful now. What's helpful now is really, coming from that sense of curiosity, and also just having a strong point of view. Which anyone comes in, I'm like, this is a point of view that we have as an organization, right? And because of these market insights, et cetera, I can train to that. But someone has to be coachable and curious. Those are two of my biggest things that I look for.
How do you sell people on moving into sales if they are coming from an untraditional route and you're trying to say, hey, I know, sales has stigma, but I think it's awesome for XYZ reasons. What do you tell them?
Yeah, I leverage myself as a story because honestly, I don't want to say kicking, but I pretty much was dragged into sales, right? And I think that like you bringing up that stigma is so important. I think a lot of people have this view of sales, and it's not right, and it's you are there to help people, and you are there to have a conversation. And so that's how I approach people. I'm like, hey, I know you've never done sales. Truth be told, it wasn't on my dance card either, but here's what I found is that I just treated it like any other conversation. And I've always been curious. You have demonstrated these skills. Have you considered it? And because I think you'd be really good at it. And just like me, I had someone who believed in me, like, hey, these skills it is transferable. And give them a path. And I love coaching, mentoring. And so I always say, I have a way for you to get there. If you are willing to trust me and invest, I'll invest in you. And I don't want to say it's an easy conversation, because I've pulled people from project management, from bartending, from, operations, like, I've even pulled people from marketing, which is maybe not as, they obviously know about sales, but some of my best salespeople have come from marketing. I'm like, you'd be so much better at sales than you are at marketing. And here's why.
Yeah, it makes sense that you put together good executive dinners then with this kind of melting pot of people approach.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now. You oversee marketing, sales, and customer success. And you've been able to lead the Pavilion chapter. I saw you're writing an article recently, AI in healthcare. How do
Mhm.
you manage to keep hold of all of the operational things that you need to do? Make sales and think about the future of your business, but then also keep an eye on the future of the industry too. That's a tall order. So how do you go about that?
So I call myself an AI enthusiast. I have about 300 hours in between ChatGPT, Claude, Notebook, LLM, Perplexity, all the things. And I've actually used it as a sidekick. So, for example, I have a custom GPT that's obviously in the paid version that goes out and looks at competitors, and it's does it on a weekly basis. And I have used Zapier and automated, so it updates our battle cards. So all I have to do is, I get a notification when a battle card's been updated, but it goes out every week and looks at news, 10Ks, etc., to update those battle cards. So that's just an example of, so I'm just maximizing my time. So it took time to build that, but now that it's set, I got time back. So
Awesome.
literally by using AI for different things that, maybe someone else would be doing on the team or I'd have to direct, I just found ways that were, how can I get more time back for our team? And that was like, I just sending it out to scrub our competitors and look at news and 10Ks, etc. Is just one example of a super easy way to get time back. On the marketing side of the house, everything from repurposing content, listening to customer calls, changing positioning, messaging, etc., creating campaigns from how customers articulate value. Once again, save 15 hours by using AI. I think anyone as a leader who is not using AI in their job is already behind. I know agents are on the way, but like I said, it's just a way to get back time. And I think it's just really important to be a force multiplier. And for us, AI was a force multiplier in order for
What
us
about?
to actually focus more time with the customer.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about AI for healthcare specifically? So you've talked about your specific company.
Right.
Your article was more about the industry and the potential application in the
Yep.
space there. What are you most curious about in that space?
Yeah, so I'm, just as someone who has a clinical background, I'm really hopeful about the innovation and disruptiveness that AI could potentially bring. So, in the US, healthcare is very expensive, and there are things that, that can be done to either make healthcare more accessible, more affordable without impacting you know, um, patient outcomes. In fact, you can have better patient outcomes. So, in the news, because of COVID and beyond, you've heard like physician burnout. One of the
Mhm.
most easiest things that, hospitals and clinics can do is use a AI scribe that not only listens to the patient doctor conversation, but automatically documents, right? And then the doctor just has to sign off. That's a lot less, cognitive burden, so that can help reduce burnout. And then there can be like workflows. It's not AI, but that can help, whether it's a prescription needs to go, etc. Then where I used to work, precision medicine, and for those who aren't, clinical, precision medicine is just if you have a disease, like for example, you are diagnosed with cancer, they would actually take a sample. So they're looking at your genetics and they would determine the best course of treatment based on your genetics. And so precision medicine is one of those areas that can not only reduce cost, but increase the chance of you living longer because you get the right treatment the first time versus them experimenting. Like back in the day, it might take 3, 4 rounds of treatments before they get you on the right one and shrink that tumor, right? Wouldn't you rather be on the first one and go on your life and be in remission? 100%, right? So things like that. And then robotics, in Asia, they have performed surgeries completely with AI. They've done some amazing things. So I think there are a lot of things like I just shared that are super exciting. But there's also, we can never lose sight of the fact that healthcare specifically, is very, if you get a diagnosis, it's very emotional, there's that emotional component. And I don't think that you will always have just AI be that thing that can replace that human to human touch and that caring and that empathy. I think that will always be there, but I think there are things that can truly make a difference and make it more affordable and accessible, and also better patient outcomes. And like I said, the precision medicine is just one area that's, very intriguing. Drug research is another one. Before it would take years and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and that's why some of these new drugs are so expensive, is because of the research and development costs into them. If they can do that quicker and reduce that time and spend, that means that those new drugs coming out will be cheaper. Now big pharma is probably like cursing me right now as I say this, because that reduces their profit. But I think especially some diseases that aren't as common, and so they don't get the dollars and funding. This is another way where there's, rare diseases could potentially be treated, because they just haven't got the R&D dollars into them, because it's not worth it for pharma to create those drugs, but that's still impacting someone's life. So I'm excited about the impact for patients.
Absolutely. There's a lot to be hopeful for there.
100%.
So you've now been in, you mentioned kind of two career arcs, and in your second career arc, you've now seen sales through a bunch of companies, through individual contribution, through leadership,
Mm-hmm.
through underlying technological changes, the healthcare system changes. What has changed the most about sales since you started?
I would say the outbound motion has changed the most. Attention is currency, and before, it was really easy, like, to send emails and get a response. And now I think you really do have to differentiate yourself. And I don't think phone calls are dead. I mean, for us, still picking up the phone is one of the best things. But video is another way to open the door, and then having the sales rooms where I can't speak for other industries, but in healthcare specifically, the buying committee can be as many as 30 plus people. And so
Wow.
having a room and like a mutual action plan where everyone can see all the moving parts and pieces, so you don't delay the sales cycle, because you may have vendor management, you may have information security, obviously with HIPAA and compliance, that's a big deal. And then you have legal, then you have the vendor management, and then you actually have the people in the business unit that you're working with who want to implement, right?
Yeah.
That's just to, that's just to give you an idea of flavor, right? So it's a complex enterprise deal. Back in the day, it might be one to one. You could have a conversation and someone could just sign. That is not the case now.
How do you solve for that?
So for us, it's really multi-threading and finding a champion, and then making the decision maker the champion. Early on, the champion may not necessarily be the decision maker, but the decision maker needs to be the champion, understanding their business better than they do, and building a mutual success or action plan, and having those milestones agreed upon. But it's getting that decision maker as your champion, because they can. If you don't have them as a champion, you run the risk of the deal going awry at the last minute. They can pull anytime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll ask the inverse of the question. So I ask kind of what's changed about sales. What do you still feel is like the fundamental core of it that remains the same as when you first started? It's something that you do where you say this is the same as it was day one.
And that's just helping customers, right? It's like, from the thing that has not changed is it is a conversation. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it. Even though it's a complex sales cycle, at the end of the day, it's human to human. You have a conversation. Do you have a problem? Yes. Is it something that is worth changing for? Yes. Is it worth changing right now? Yes. Okay, then we can move forward, right? So that qualification, I know I oversimplified it, but that's what you have to get to, right? And always having that strong point of view has not changed, and that's I think what makes a great conversation.
Can I ask you if you have like just a good farm story to finish?
Sure, 100%.
All right. So to close, most of our audience is technology sales and probably behind a computer. So I would like to bring them a dose of farm life. If you do, you have a story that comes to mind when that maybe that made you want to get the ticket out of there that you referenced?
Yeah. So as I shared earlier, my nickname was Pooper Scooper, or Ram Poop, because literally I hauled manure all the time, and it's just one of those things you just can't get the smell out of your clothes. But the other thing was, and this was the clincher, calving season. So we raise Gelvies, and sometimes you were asked to help pull a calf because it would get stuck. And because I had long, skinny arms, I was always the person who had to glove up. So literally, you have a glove that goes all the way to here. And I was pulling, and my dad said something. I opened my mouth, and I'll just let the audience figure out what happened next and why I was like, that's it. That was the clincher. I mean, I was always on my way for education, but I was like, there is just no amount of I just don't love farming.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. I think that's a
It left
great
a
note
bad
to end
taste
on.
in my mouth, literally.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. I think if you're listening to this and you think you've had a challenging day, I hope that this puts things into perspective. And Randy, I'm really grateful to you for sharing not only that story but your whole journey with us. It was awesome, and we'll of course put your LinkedIn on in the post and share a link to BESLER and all the cool stuff you're doing there in the Dallas Fort Worth chapter of Pavilion. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Kevin.